Okay, so I've been listening to a lot of the witnesses that Binger has brought to the stand. Richie McGinnis was up there and didn't quite provide Binger what he was wanting. For one, he was really hoping that Richie McGinnis would go along with his idea that Joseph Rosenbaum was just merely falling and then Kyle just mercilessly shot him. And Richie said, "No, I am not going to say that. He was lunging for the gun." you could tell Binger was not happy about that. But whatever the case, I'm going to go ahead and skip Richie McGinnis's testimony, although it is really quite important. But I find that Ryan Balch's testimony to be more interesting. Hello out there. I am trying to get through.
With his powerful brainwaves cradled in the warmth of reasoning, it's time for Johnnie Walker Dredd to straighten you out on a thing or two. Emanating all the way from exciting Las Vegas, Oklahoma, it's the Johnnie Walker Dredd Show.
I want to ask a couple of clarification questions. First of all, you said some of the folks were, I think you said dressed like you or equipped like you. I'm not sure how you phrased it, but can you tell us what you mean by that?
The one guy that I spoke to was wearing a plate carrier carrying an AR-15.
Sorry, wearing what?
I'm sorry. Plate carrier, body armor, and carrying an AR-15.
Did you have body armor on?
I did.
And you were carrying an AR-15?
This is correct.
This other person you talked to, were they ex-military like you? Do you remember?
They said that they had worked for Blackwater.
And that's a private security contractor?
Private security contractor.
Okay. You mentioned, you said vans, I think, more than one?
Correct. There were 2 vehicles at least that showed up.
Do you know where those folks came from?
I didn't question them.
Had you ever seen or met any of those folks before?
No.
Other than the people you've described coming down with, Dustin Collette, Danton Mertz, the unknown female, and later on Jason Lekowski.
Right.
Other than those folks, the people you encountered on this particular evening, either this location or elsewhere, had you met any of them before?
No.
Obviously, never met the defendant before?
No.
Had no idea who he was before that night?
Nope.
Okay, so this works in Kyle's favor. Ryan didn't know Kyle. Therefore, he's not likely to lie for him.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Yeah, you could pick up on the lady sometime later, Binger. We're in session right now.
You mentioned that one of the folks that came in the vans was similarly equipped as you, and then the rest had different types of, I think you could characterize them as melee weapons. Would that be fair to say?
That would be fair to say.
Meaning not guns such as handguns or shotguns or AR-15s.
Correct.
Yeah, the kind of weapon that you don't really use for defensive uses, the kind of stuff that you use to go and scrap with.
And I believe you said that at some point there was an understanding that those folks that came in the vans would stay at 63rd Street Car Source, and some of you, including yourself, would go up to the 59th Street Car Source. Is that fair to say?
That is fair to say.
What time of day was this when you were having this encounter at the 63rd Street
It
Car
was
Source?
approximately 7:30 p.m.
You were aware that the city of Kenosha had a curfew that night at 8 p.m., correct?
Correct.
Correct. He doesn't care about breaking curfew.
You intended to stay past the curfew time. Is that fair to say?
That is correct.
I know you mentioned earlier something about hearing about the prior night's events, things like that. Maybe I asked this, and you may have given me a little bit of an answer, but what were you actually intending to do physically? Like, what were you actually going to do when you got here to Kenosha?
Now, Binger wants him to come back and say things like, we had no intention of hurting anyone. Everything would have been fine. We only carried the rifles for our own personal protection, and anybody who actually had to use their rifle that night must be doing something wrong. That's kind of where Binger's going with this.
The intent when we got down there was to stop the people from looting and rioting and whatnot. Most of the protesters that I talked to before coming down there were trying to control them throughout the night, and it just wasn't working. So we were there to be more of a deterrence than anything.
What were you going to do yourself, personally, to accomplish that goal?
Binger already knows his answer. He's going to come back and say pretty innocuous things. Just be there. My presence alone would stop anything. I wouldn't have to use my gun. And therefore, somebody who did must be doing it wrong.
Pretty much tell people to stop. Throughout the night, it kind of proved out that we didn't have to actually do anything to not have them do it, just us being there. It seemed to work, and that was kind of my intent the whole time, was to just be there, be seen, and to deter people from doing that.
You mentioned your AR-15 and your body armor that you were wearing. Beyond that, what sort of equipment did you bring along to assist you? Maybe not stuff you actually used, but things you brought along in preparation for this night.
Binger's hoping he comes back and says, oh, we had lots of non-lethal because we didn't want to hurt anyone. And who was it that said he didn't have any non-lethal? Well, that was Kyle Rittenhouse. He must be out there to hurt people.
Dustin Collette had brought some pepper spray grenades with him, and he kind of handed those out.
We've seen photographs of you and videos of you, which we'll get to in a little bit. It appears that you've got maybe a utility belt on or something like that. I don't know. Can you tell us in your own words what other things you had on your body in terms of equipment?
I had extra ammunition and extra medical equipment.
Any other types of weapons or self-defense equipment on you?
I had a Glock 17 handgun, ammunition for that. But as far as a less than lethal option, no.
You talked about your desire to serve as a deterrent to people. What was it about you or your actions that you thought would work as a deterrent?
Typically the people that were, and from what I've been told by the protesters and stuff, they were selecting places that were unguarded, that there was nobody there, that they could just go in, do what they need, light it on fire, take whatever they wanted, and roll out after that.
This works against Binger. The jury is composed of people who have probably been affected by these arsons. And here's a guy who's saying that the people who are burning places are going after unguarded places. And therefore, anybody who goes in and guards that place is doing us a great thing. I think Binger misfired here. He had to have known what Ryan was going to come back and say. It's his witness. But I don't think this was a good move. It just reinforces the notion that the people who came in to guard the businesses were the good guys.
So I figured just being there would be enough.
If just being there was enough, why did you bring along an AR-15, a handgun, and wear body armor?
Well, because those people could be armed too. If I'm going to get shot, I'd rather have body armor on, first and foremost. And I would like to be able to defend myself from it as well.
So is it fair to say that coming down to Kenosha that night, you were prepared for the possibility that there would be gunfire?
That's correct.
You were prepared to use your gun to defend yourself?
That is correct.
Were you planning on using the gun to protect the property that you were guarding?
No.
So, for example, we know that you were at the 59th Street car source for a lot of the evening. If you had seen someone attempting to damage a vehicle, would you have used your gun and fired at that person to protect that property?
No.
At any point that evening, I know I'm skipping ahead a little.
Okay, and so this destroys the anti-Kyle's argument that the people that were there to guard the property were really there to hurt people. They were going to shoot anybody that tried to damage property. Now, Binger's aiming this thing at, all of these people that were guarding the property were good guys, except one. The one person who did open fire. Now, you may be wondering, wait a minute, I thought that Binger was going to be all over these militia types, whatever you want to call them. Why isn't he out there trying to paint Ryan Balch as a bad guy? He can't. The jury comprises 20 people because of the alternates. Let's say a whole bunch of people who have been really disaffected by the riots. Binger is not that stupid. He realizes that he can't paint these guys as the demons. They were showing up to safeguard the community. And so he has to be very careful here. He can't take the anti-Kyle's stance. People who are not from Kenosha, that are looking at this thing from the outside, have been forming this opinion that the people who went to Kenosha to guard those properties, well, they're the bad guys. They cross state lines, and they're not even from Kenosha. But from a person who's in Kenosha, who lives there, these guys might not be such bad guys after all. They may be looking at them as community protectors, and they may be on the jury. And so, sorry, anti-Kyles, but your own prosecutor is backing away from that stupid argument.
But I'm trying to get to a point here. Did you go inside the 59th Street car source?
A couple of times, yes.
What was inside there?
Several cars that were being worked on, some tables, some chairs.
How did you get inside? I'd be asking him that question if I'm the defense. How did you get inside? Did you break in? Well, no. The owner let us in. Oh, okay. So in other words, there was an agreement. Because you know and I know The owner is not going to leave his building unlocked during a riot. He's not going to leave it unlocked at any time after he closes. And therefore, if those guys had access to the interior, they either broke in or they were let in. And guess what? They were let in. The owner was in on this.
Or is there a living quarters or an apartment or anything like that where someone was able to sleep or live?
Not that I saw, but I did see that it was attached to a gas station.
Do you know if the gas station was open and in business at that time?
When we walked by, it appeared to be in business.
But it's fair to say that no one was living here. This was all business property. Fair
That
to
is
say?
fair to say.
As opposed to a house or an apartment.
That's fair to say.
If there had been any sort of damage to the building, the CarSource building, such as being lit on fire or rocks thrown at it or anything like that, would that have caused an injury or a death to a person?
Had the fire spread to the residential building behind it, yes.
Okay.
Oh, Binger was not wanting that one. He was trying to point Ryan to say, no, there really was nothing that was going to hurt anybody, so we really didn't have to be there. But guess what? Ryan didn't play along.
At any point in this evening, did anyone try and start a fire at that CarSource location?
Later on in the evening, they tried to start a dumpster on fire, and before that, they tried to light the church next door on fire.
And that's the church that's to the north across 59th Street?
Correct.
Okay. The dumpster that was attempted to be started on fire was actually located in the street when that event occurred. Is that
Correct.
right?
They pulled it off the parking lot area of CarSource and lit it on fire in the street.
Yeah, Binger is trying to distance arson away from where Kyle was to try to make it look like Kyle really didn't have to be there to protect the property. The property was fine. So why was Kyle there? Well, he must have been out there looking to hurt people. But that's Binger's approach. And you can tell he's trying to paint this image that arson really was not a threat that night to where Kyle was.
So rather than try and light the fire where the dumpster is in the CarSource lot, they took it out in the road and then lit it on fire.
Yes, away from where they were.
Correct.
And I believe that's where, at some point that evening, Dustin Collette goes out and puts the fire out.
That is correct.
Okay. I skipped around a little bit there. I want to go back to where we were. I believe you were describing how there was vans that met at 63rd. There was some sort of understanding that they would stay there, and you and others would go up to the 59th Street CarSource. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
What did you do after that?
I went across the street to the hospital where the other guy had gone. I met their guy they had watching the gate, and I didn't wholly trust the people who had agreed to stay down at 63rd. So I gave him my cell phone number and said, hey, if these guys leave or somebody starts breaking stuff, call us.
Did you ever get a call that night?
No.
What did you do after that?
We kind of gathered up. I think we took a picture, and then we went up to 59th.
When you say we went up to 59th, who all came along with you?
That would have been Dustin, the female, Danton Mertz, Kyle Rittenhouse, Dominic, and Nathan.
Other than the folks you just mentioned, did anyone else come along that you can recall?
Not that I can recall.
Is it fair to say that when you first got to the 59th Street location, the people you just mentioned was the group that was there protecting that property?
Yes.
I know Jason Lukowski comes later. Other than him, was anyone else there that night at 59th Street that may have arrived later to help with what you were doing?
Some family members from Kyle's friends showed up.
Do you remember who they were?
One of them was one of their fathers. There was somebody else that came through. They were there for 5-10 minutes, and they left. I didn't know who that was.
Wonder who the father was. Does anybody know?
Do you remember approximately what time it was when you got up to the 59th Street CarSource location?
We crossed 60th right as the sirens went off at 8 p.m. So we arrived at 59th around 8:01, 8:02.
Where did you position yourself at that point?
I stayed on the ground outside in the car lot area. Most of the cars were burned out at that point. And some of the guys went up on the roof, and some of us stayed down on the ground level.
Now, you mentioned earlier you met the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse, that evening.
Correct.
And that was first at the 63rd Street CarSource, right?
Yes.
And then he came along up to the 59th Street CarSource.
Yes.
Did he ever tell you how old he was?
We asked the group when we first got there. They looked kind of young, and the general consensus was 19.
Not sure what you mean by general consensus. Is that something the defendant actually said?
It seems like as a group they were saying it, and I didn't ask. I was just kind of off to the side when that conversation happened.
Well, that's kind of odd. In other words, I think what he is saying is that he asked, and they all kind of said 19, but he didn't ask Kyle directly how old he was.
After everything happened on August 25th, you met with an FBI agent by the name of Tim Walther at your residence up in Jackson. Do you remember that?
I do.
And do you remember him talking to you about this particular night?
Yes.
And do you remember telling him, and I'm going to quote from your statement here, Rittenhouse told Balch that he was 19. However, Balch thought he was younger. Do you remember saying that to the agent?
I do.
Did the defendant say anything else to you about himself or his qualifications or anything like that?
Early on in the night, no.
Is it fair to say that as the night went on, while you were on the ground in front of the 59th Street car source, the defendant was also in that proximity area?
That is correct.
Were there times during the evening when you would chat with him about various things?
That is correct.
What was your impression of the defendant?
He seems like a young and impressionable kid. They use that term kind of broadly there.
Binger didn't want him to say that. Young and impressionable kids. Juries typically don't send young and impressionable kids to 60 years in prison. He wanted him to say something like immature, irresponsible, something along those lines. Young and impressionable kid. Interesting.
Someone way younger than myself. He seemed to be really interested in what I had done in life. When Jason Lakowski showed up, he seemed to be interested in what he had done in life. He had explained some of the stuff he had been doing, the lifeguard, being a lifeguard, being EMT certified, stuff like that.
So
being a lifeguard, interested in what other people were doing, that's painting a very human face on Kyle. And I'm not sure that Binger should have opened this thing up.
the defendant told you that he was a certified EMT
This is correct.
and that he was 19 years old.
This is correct.
What did you think about the defendant being there that night?
He had as much right as anybody else to be there.
He did.
He had as much right to be there as anybody else. Again, Binger didn't really want him to say that.
Seem like he was properly equipped or prepared to be out there doing what he was doing that night?
He seemed a little under-equipped, and under-experienced as well, which is one of the reasons we kind of stayed with him.
When you say we stayed with him, who do you mean?
Danton, Mertz, Dustin Colette, and the female.
Did you feel like you needed to keep an eye on the defendant?
He seemed like it. Yes and no. I felt like, as young as he looked, and the way he was, just the general way he was carrying himself, the protesters would have seen that as a weakness and tried to exploit that.
Oh, another one that Binger didn't want him saying. A protester might see that as a weakness and chase him, try to hurt him. What Binger wanted was for him to come in and say, yeah, he was so under-equipped and young, he really shouldn't have been out there that night. But he got something else instead. So far, this is not looking good for the prosecution. This guy is painting Kyle as a young and impressionable kid, a human being, who may be a little bewildered, may have fibbed about his age, but are you going to send somebody to prison for 60 years for doing something like that?
Is it fair to say that you took it upon yourself that evening to stay close to the defendant to ensure there were no problems?
We pretty much all picked one of the guys that we met at 63rd and kind of looked out for him, yes.
And you personally picked the defendant?
It's kind of more of a he picked me kind of thing.
At any rate, it turned out that you spent a lot of the evening close by the defendant. Fair enough?
That is fair.
Okay. One of the things that the defendant was asking you about was your military experience. Is that
Kyle's taking notes because he thinks his defense kind of sucks. They're raising no objections. They're really not doing much to get in the way of the prosecution. So Kyle's thinking, pro se, pro se. With Mark Richards' performance so far, Kyle might be better off going pro se here. I'm kind of kidding. But Mark Richards and Shiropoulos have been catching a lot of flack for their lackadaisical, sluggish performance so far. They pretty well let Binger run free reign here.
Is that right?
This is correct.
What did you tell him about that?
I just told him about the various deployments and what I'd done while I was there.
Now, you mentioned earlier that when you arrived at the 59th Street car source, it was a little after 8 o'clock, a little after curfew. Can you describe for us what the scene was at that location at that time?
Most of the cars in the parking area had been burned out. The building itself had been boarded up pretty good. You could see some evidence on the side of the building where people had thrown things at it to try to start it on fire. But other than that, it did look like a war zone, is what I would say.
What about the street in front Sheridan Road in that area? Were there a lot of people around at that point?
At the time, it was mostly law enforcement and people similar to us milling around. We had an occasional group of protesters coming through.
Now, there are, on that particular evening, there are protests that were going on in Kenosha. Were you aware of that at the time?
Yes, we could see them up by the courthouse from that position.
Is it fair to say that when you first got to Car Source, most of the protesters and most of the protest was north of your location?
That is correct.
Closer to Civic Center Park, which is right out in front of the courthouse?
That is correct.
Did there come a time in which the crowd started to come down closer to the 59th Street Car Source?
Before the police started to push them towards us, there were some folks that came through.
The defense needs to come in and ask, well, if there was a lot of action, a lot of rioting, why didn't you guys go there? It's exciting, isn't it? And Ryan Balch would come back and say, it's not our job. Our job is to protect property. Again, it's about Kyle Rittenhouse's state of mind. The state of mind that Binger's trying to establish is that the kid is reckless, looking for a fight, looking to get involved in things that he shouldn't. However, here, he's staying in a location that is relatively safe. Ryan Balch says the riots, we could hear them. So Kyle Rittenhouse certainly knew that the riots were over there. Then why didn't they go to the riot and get involved in some good scrapping? And that's what the defense should be exploring.
Most of them were carrying fire extinguishers and said they were putting out fires and whatnot.
You mentioned the police pushing them to you. Did there come a time when that happened?
Yes.
I've seen statements at various times where you have talked about hearing the police say something about what the plan was or what they were intending to do. Did you ever talk to any law enforcement officer that
Yes.
night? And did they tell you something about what the plan was?
Yeah, right before, I want to say around 9 p.m., me and Kyle were walking down to the Ultimate gas station, and we encountered a female deputy. And she told us, hey, we're getting ready to start pushing them down, you guys. Once that happens, it's kind of going to be on you guys. And she got in her patrol car and left.
Who was that person?
I didn't get a name.
So your understanding was that the police were going to move all these protesters into your area and give you the job of taking care of them?
She didn't insinuate that so much as it seemed like what was likely going to happen.
All right. Ryan Balch has given plenty of interviews where he has said the police told us they were going to push the crowd and that we were going to have to handle them. His statement here is a lot weaker, and it's unfortunate for Binger. Binger wanted his statement to be stronger because it's more incredulous, and he could go right after it. What he's describing here could easily have happened. And so it's another swing and a miss for Binger.
Do you know what the rank of this person was that you spoke to? Was this a captain, a lieutenant, a sergeant, anything like that?
I didn't see any rank.
Other than that, did you speak with any other law enforcement officers about this notion?
No.
How hard would it have been to figure out who it was when it's a female officer at night? How many of them do they have? You could have easily interviewed a number of them and found out which ones it could have been. I'm thinking, but whatever.
And you said the defendant witnessed that.
That's correct.
And I believe you mentioned that was around 9 o'clock?
It would have been around 9 o'clock.
Had the police already pushed the protesters down your way at that point, or did that come later?
That came a little bit later. They started pushing them around 9:30, 10.
Okay. So I want to talk about the time period from when you first got to 59th at around 8 or so, and that time at 9:30 or 10 when the protesters start getting pushed down your way. So there's an hour and a half, maybe 2 hour period of time.
Okay.
During that time period, where were you located?
For the most part, 59th.
Was the defendant also there?
That is correct.
What were you doing?
Oh, we were just kind of standing around talking. A couple of times, some of the protesters came over and told us that, hey, some people are trying to set this building on fire, so we'd go over there, and when we show up, they'd run away. That's around the time that we were told they were trying to light the church on fire. And at that point, we were told it was a bald guy with a red shirt.
Oh, Binger didn't want to hear this, although I have a feeling he knew it was coming. It's his witness. But there was a church being set on fire, and the perpetrator was a bald dude with a red shirt. Gee, I wonder who that was.
So let me stop you for a second. You indicated that there were times in which you received reports that someone was trying to start something on fire, and you said we would go over there. Who's we?
It was a mix each time.
Did the defendant ever go?
He went with us at least once when we went over to the Stella when they were trying to break the windows out over there.
Okay. So tell me what you remember about that.
So the same protesters that were carrying fire extinguishers before, they were from Kenosha. They had stopped and talked with us quite a bit. In fact, we'd helped them carry somebody from up at the protest back beyond the police so they could take them to the hospital. And the defendant helped with that as well.
Uh-oh, Binger is not really doing well here. Here's Kyle helping a protester get to the hospital. What happened to this? Kyle was out there to hurt people. He was reckless, itching to shoot someone. You have Ryan Balch here saying No, I mean, there was an injured protester, and I helped take this person to the hospital. Kyle helped too. Strange behavior for a lunatic vigilante.
They came running down because they were, in their words, they were people trying to break into the Stella and light it on fire. Somebody had pointed a gun at them, and the cops weren't around. So we headed across the other car source facility.
Notice what he said. Somebody pointed a gun at somebody and the cops weren't around. Lack of law enforcement.
Across the way into the burned out cars, and there were 3 to 4 subjects breaking out windows on the Stella and just milling around over there. And once we got to within 100 yards of them, I believe it was Colette yelled out at them. They turned and saw us and they ran off.
You were one of the people along with Dustin Colette that went over there?
That's correct.
Who else went with you?
I want to say that Kyle was with us and one of the protesters who had told us about it.
So Kyle was with you when you helped thwart a crime in the Kenosha community. The jury's having to think about this a little.
So, I understand no one wants windows broken out or fire started or anything like this, but what gave you the right to go around and police that area?
Oh no, Binger, bad move. The people on the jury have been affected by a riot. They're in no mood for you to attack the people who are out there trying to protect that property. Who gave you the authority? Where were the police? They were gone. And so guess what? People stepped in to the vacuum to help. And there's going to be plenty on the jury that are going to think, well, the police didn't give them any authority, but screw them. Somebody had to guard that property, and I'm glad that there were young men there that were willing to step in and guard it. Yeah, I know that a lot of jury members may not go along with that. They're the woke crowd that believe that if you would just let the protesters burn everything down, as long as nobody gets hurt, it's good. There's some, but not all 12 are going to be like that.
Well, there were members of the community that asked us to go help them.
Who?
These 4 protesters.
Well,
Binger said, who? Hoping to stump him. Guess what? Ryan goes back, these protesters.
you characterize as folks walking with fire extinguishers. Were they from the Stella?
They came from that direction.
Were they employed by the Stella?
I didn't ask.
It's fair to say you heard a report that somebody was up to no good and you decided to head over there and stop.
Correct.
Other than that, you don't know anything more about what was going on?
No.
And these people you saw milling about at the Stella, do you know who they were?
One was one of them was fairly tall. The rest of the people seemed to be about average height or shorter.
Beyond that description of their height, do you know anything else about them?
No, we didn't get that close.
Don't know where they came from?
Nope.
Don't know their names?
Nope.
Don't know where they went afterwards?
Nope.
Don't know what their affiliation, if any, was with the Stella? Right?
I would assume they weren't affiliated with the Stella.
I would assume somebody breaking the Stella's windows was probably not. I agree with that. But my point is you're making an assumption
Correct.
with less than perfect information.
That is correct.
You mentioned a fire at the...
Binger's back to his old tricks. Remember the CVS video deal where he said, well, Kyle wanted to insert himself into a situation when he didn't have full knowledge of what was going on. He even went so far as to say that Kyle should not have called 911, or he insinuated that Kyle should not have called 911 because to call 911 when you don't even have all the information, well, there's something wrong with that. Now, normal people, like people on the jury, are going to look at this and say, wait a minute. They hear about a crime being reported and they went to go and investigate and shoot away the people that were doing it. What the hell's wrong with that? But Binger is of this mindset that never help anybody unless you've been given authority. So if you hear screams next door, well, you can't even call 911 because maybe it's the television turned up really loudly. You can't make these assumptions. Most people would say, hey, it comes down to sort of, do you think that something horrible could be happening? Then you do something about it. But not Binger. So this is not a good look. Binger should not have done that. No one is going to buy this. You should never do anything until you have all the information in front of you.
St. James, was that the St. James Church?
this church right here.
Now, can you just put your pointer back up right where you were doing? This is a satellite photograph of Kenosha that's a little older. There's a building that you're pointing at right now. On the night of August 25th, 2020, that building wasn't standing anymore, was it?
No.
There was a pile of
There was
rubble?
rubble right here, but there's another building right in there.
Okay. The church itself is actually on the other end of the north end of the block along 58th Street. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. When you mentioned something about a fire or somebody trying to start a fire at that location. Can you tell us more about that?
Yes, the same individuals that told us about the Stella showed up again, and they described a female, 2 males trying to light a fire at the church.
A female and 2 males trying to start a fire in a church. I wonder who that could be.
What did you do?
We kind of just walked around the street to kind of look around there. When we got there, we could see somebody on the front of the church. They saw us. They ran off.
Did you see anything more than that one person?
No.
Did you see what that person was doing?
No.
Did you see a fire?
No.
Did you put out a fire?
No.
We talked about, and again, I started this with asking you about that 8 o'clock to 9:30 or 10 o'clock period of time, and you've described a couple of things, the Stella incident, the St. James incident. So beyond that,
By the way, that last exchange, yeah, he got Ryan Balch to admit that he didn't actually stop an arson, although the jury's going to say, yeah, but I mean, they heard a report about it, they went to investigate it, to stop it. They're protecting our community, even though maybe they weren't really needed. But what Ryan Balch scored there was credibility. You didn't really see a fire? No. Did you really stop a fire? No. The jury is going to come to a conclusion. This guy's pretty credible. I mean, he doesn't seem to be wanting to inflate his actions. He seems to be telling a truthful story. And that's a problem for Thomas Claire Binger.
what other things were you doing in that period of time?
We were walking down to 63rd to check it out. At that point, we'd figured out that the folks that said they were going to stay there no longer stayed there. So onesies and two at a time, people were going down there to check on it. Then they would go over to the Ultimate, check on the guys over there, see what they were doing, and then circle back and come back.
We've seen some photos and videos of the Ultimate gas station. Would it be fair to say that there were people protecting that location that were similar to your group, armed with long rifles, things like that?
That is correct.
And you mentioned that whatever these vans were with these folks with melee weapons at 63rd, at some point in the evening you found out they weren't there anymore?
That is correct.
I want to ask more specifically about that. Was that something that you personally found out or you heard from someone else?
I kind of just heard it through discussion that there was nobody down there anymore.
When you heard that, how many people were in your group guarding the 59th Street location at that point?
It would have been around 7 or 8.
And you said you would send groups of 2 people at a time to go down to 63rd?
That's correct.
Were you ever one of those folks?
Yes.
Was the defendant?
Yes.
What was going on when you went down there?
When we went down that way, there was nobody down there. A couple of the folks that had been down there initially had moved over to the Ultimate. That seemed to be where they had kind of ganged up with the folks with the melee stuff and kind of gone.
Okay, so I want to make sure I'm understanding you. You said a couple of the folks that were at the 63rd Street car source initially wound up going over to the Ultimate gas station?
That is correct.
Were those folks that came in those vans?
One of them came at the same time the vans did.
Okay. So one of the people that came at the same time as the vans did wound up at Ultimate Gas.
That is correct.
And it sounds like there may have been more than just one person from 63rd that wound up at Ultimate Gas?
There was one other guy that was with him when we showed up.
Okay. So is it fair to say that, speaking for you personally, Mr. Balch, you felt like it was part of your responsibility to not only guard the 59th Street car source, but also the 63rd Street car source?
That is correct.
Which is why you and other folks were going down there to check on it.
That's correct.
Okay. So I want to continue talking about that 8 o'clock to 9:30 or 10 o'clock period. We talked about a few things. Other than that, what else were you doing during that period of time?
Mostly we were just kind of talking to people when they would walk by. We didn't really have any negative encounters during that period of time. You'd get the occasional person wanting to have a debate and whatnot, but most of it was just walking down to 63rd, somebody coming saying somebody's trying to light something on fire, go check it out, come back, wash, rinse, repeat.
Okay. So now you've mentioned there was a time when the police started to move the protesters in your direction, and I think you said earlier that was around 9:30 or 10 o'clock?
This is correct.
Okay. Tell us about that.
As soon as they started pushing the protesters, we started getting the people who weren't intending on participating in a riot, I should say, started kind of drifting down towards us. They were shouting insults at us, and some of the other members of the group were having back and forth with them. I spent the large majority of that time trying to calm people down and just keep them moving down the street. Then we started encountering people who were more and more aggressive, and the cops would push them, then they would back off, then they'd come back and push them again, and they would push them further south each time. That's south.
What the prosecution's hoping for is that Kyle is one of those people who's mouthing off at the protesters. Is he going to get it?
When you describe these interactions with the people walking past, was the defendant present for any of that?
He had one exchange that I saw.
Who was that with?
Just some random person in the crowd screamed, "Fuck you."
At the defendant?
Yes.
How did the defendant react to that?
He said, "I love you too, ma'am."
Oh, that's killer. Binger really felt he was so close. He had a negative interaction? Really, tell us about it. Oh, sure. He said, what? Yeah, this is a kid who's out looking for trouble. And again, Ryan Balch comes off as somebody here who's pretty sincere.
You mentioned earlier that there was some sort of report of someone in a red shirt with bald head who was...
Yeah, Kyle needs to be careful here. You got to keep your game face on. And I know that people mistake, smiles and stuff. I mean, they take them the wrong way. But you got to keep a poker face going here. You're facing 60 years.
Reported to be involved in some sort of incident. I think I heard you mention that.
Yes.
We now know with the benefit of hindsight who Joseph Rosenbaum was, and we've seen photographs of him in a red shirt and a bald head. Let me start by asking, whatever report you heard regarding Mr. Rosenbaum at that particular time...
By the way, Binger, are you now admitting that it was Joseph Rosenbaum that he saw earlier with the red shirt and the bald head? That's kind of strange. I don't think I would have admitted that if I was the prosecution.
Did you ever see him at that time?
I'd seen someone fitting the description, kind of milling in and out of the groups that were coming through. Every time he was around the groups, now that I know who Joseph Rosenbaum was and can confirm who he was and stuff, he was not organic with the protesters.
What do you mean by that?
They didn't seem comfortable with his presence or the people that were with him.
Who was with him?
He had a male and a female that were with him.
We all know who that is. Josh Zeminski and Kelly Zeminski.
Pretty much consistently throughout the night.
So you saw those folks together?
Yes.
Him and the male and the female. Did you ever see them speaking to one another?
The male and the female, yes, but as far as them talking to him directly, no.
So you never saw Mr. Rosenbaum talk to that male or female?
No.
And you never saw the male and female talk to Mr. Rosenbaum?
No.
But you saw them in proximity to one another, so you're making some sort of assumption that they had some sort of association. Is that fair to say?
I saw them in close proximity with each other several times, which led to that assumption.
Okay.
It's a good answer. Binger was hoping that he would say, well, I guess you're right. Maybe they really weren't knowledgeable of each other. But Ryan Balch fires back. Hey, I saw them together a lot. So it's a pretty fair assumption that they were together.
Tell us about the first time that you observed Mr. Rosenbaum.
The first time he was just getting aggravated with someone in the crowd. And the protesters were trying to separate him from whoever that was. And he was shouting, fuck you kind of things to everyone. And they kind of walked off. And one of the things that stood out to me was the tall male that was with him had a handgun in his hand with the finger on the trigger.
With the finger on the trigger. Now, Binger is going to try to aim this thing for, well, if he had his finger on the trigger, that's really dangerous. Then why did Kyle stick around and go out into the crowd? He should have known it was really dangerous. However, I don't think that the jury is perceiving it that way. He had his finger on the trigger, makes Joshua Zeminski look like a really bad dude. The kind of person that would destroy your community.
Pointed down to the ground.
Now, you had an AR-15.
This is correct.
And you had your hand on the butt of that AR-15.
No.
At no point?
Hand on the grip with the fingers straight forward along the side of the receiver.
I misspoke when I said butt. I mean, the grip, the pistol grip of the AR-15, you had your hand on that with your finger not on the trigger, but within close proximity. Fair
That is
to say?
correct.
Okay.
Okay, all you anti-Kyles out there who said, Kyle Rittenhouse didn't exercise proper trigger safety. He's telling you, he's a former military. He knows how to handle a rifle, and he's very confident. Nope. Finger on the receiver, straight out, just like Kyle was doing it. He's saying that's how he does it. And he's really confident. He knows fully well that's a perfectly acceptable way to hold a rifle. And I told you this in another video.
And this individual had a handgun
Right.
with his finger on the trigger.
This is correct.
And that caused you to be concerned of some sort of what?
Well,
What do you think? I mean, the jury's thinking like, are you kidding me? He has his finger on the trigger. And you're asking him, well, why would that be disconcerting?
you're typically taught not to put your finger on the trigger unless you're ready to shoot. The way he was holding it, had anybody bumped into him or him tripped and fell, he would have been sending around off into who knows what. So I just saw it as unsafe.
And the potential for some sort of tragic accident.
Correct, or he was prepared for something.
Did you ever
Your witness, by the way, that's Joshua Zeminski.
see him point that gun at anyone?
No.
Did you ever see him fire that gun?
No.
And obviously, you had a gun that was bigger and more powerful than his. Fair to say?
This is fair to say.
And you're familiar with AR-15s.
That's correct.
How long had you owned your AR-15?
Since 2012.
So 8 years.
Yes.
And over that period of time, how many times had you fired your AR-15?
Oh, yeah, good question.
By August of 2020, I probably had somewhere close to 10 to 15,000 rounds through it.
And what type of ammo? What did it take? What caliber?
5.56.
And are you familiar with the term full metal jacket?
This
Are you familiar with the term full metal jacket? He's asking a guy who's done a tour in Afghanistan and Iraq.
is correct.
And is that the type of ammo you would use?
Yes.
And can you, as a military former infantryman in the Army who's fired 10 to 15,000 rounds, can you tell us a little bit about what full metal jacket bullets are?
FMJ, full metal jacket bullets are just a solid copper jacket around a lead core. There's nothing really particularly special about it. It's not particularly more dangerous than any other type of ammunition. In the state of Wisconsin, you're not allowed to hunt full metal jacket ammunition.
Do you know why that is?
Penetration, over penetration.
What does that mean?
FMJ versus hollow points. Hollow points are designed to hit the target and expand and transfer the energy. A full metal jacket's not designed to do that. So, depending on what it hits, it can just sail right on through.
So it's fair to say that a full metal jacket round fired from an AR-15 has the potential for hitting whatever it's shot at, say a deer, for example, and going through that and continuing on to something down the line.
Yeah, gee, no kidding. But here's the problem with Binger's argument. The full metal jacket is used in target practice all the time, and why did Kyle buy the rifle? He wanted to go target practicing. That's why he had those rounds. He didn't go out and buy full metal jacket so that he could shoot protesters and have the bullet go right through them.
It can.
As opposed to a hollow point, which typically hits a deer, for example, and then stops.
Yes.
And is it fair to say in your experience that a Glock handgun like you had that night is often loaded with hollow point ammunition, and a AR-15 is often loaded with full metal jacket ammunition?
It depends on what you're doing with it.
Is that what you typically would do?
I tend to run full metal jackets, yes.
In the AR-15?
In the AR-15.
What about in your Glock?
Hollow points.
And why is that?
My AR-15, I mostly use it for target and competition shooting. Glock is more for personal defense.
Loading a handgun like a Glock with hollow point ammunition is what you would consider to be the better choice for self-defense.
Yeah, for concealed carry, absolutely.
What about for open carry?
For open carry, it'd be the same thing for a Glock handgun.
When you've fired your AR-15, 10 to 15,000 rounds of full metal jacket ammunition through there, what is the furthest distance of target that you've hit with that?
500 yards.
So it's a weapon that's capable of shooting a full metal jacket round and hitting a target 500 yards away.
Its maximum effective range is 550 yards, this is correct.
Binger is just trying to convey to the jury, ooh, AR-15, dangerous, ooh. That's his deal here. So he's trying to get into a lot of military talk. 500 yards, full penetration, full metal jacket. They even have a movie, Full Metal Jacket. Boy, that must be really scary stuff. And that's all he's trying to do. He's trying to scare the jury. Again, as I said in the chat last night, the AR-15 rifle is on trial here just as much as Kyle is.
Now, we were talking about Mr. Rosenbaum and your observations of him, and I think you described something out in the street with some other protesters, or he yelled F you to them, something along those lines. What else did you see him do that night?
Every time I encountered Joseph Rosenbaum, he was hyper-aggressive and acting out in a violent manner.
Oh, he did not want him to say violent manner. He's going to come back on this.
When we say violent manner, you saw him hitting, punching, kicking
He
people?
was always having to be restrained by someone.
Okay. And I understand that. Did you ever see him hit anyone?
The crowd was pretty good about getting in between him and whoever it was. If he landed a blow, I didn't see it, but he definitely wanted to.
Well, now, you have no idea, do you, what was going on in Mr. Rosenbaum's head?
No.
Legally, he's right, but we all kind of know that it sure did seem like Joseph Rosenbaum wanted to get in a fight. What do you guys think?
You'd never met him before that night?
No.
So let's just keep to your observations if we can. How tall are you?
5'9",
How tall was Mr. Rosenbaum?
5'4", 5'3".
So much shorter and smaller than you.
Yes.
Fair?
Man, they grow him short in Wisconsin. I could have sworn this dude was at least 6 foot.
Now, I know you want to talk about what you believe he was intending to do, but my question to you was, did you ever actually see him hit anyone?
No.
Did you ever actually see him kick anyone?
No.
Did you ever actually see him with a weapon in his hand?
No.
Did you ever actually see him cause any physical injury to anyone that night?
I saw him attempt to do it on a couple occasions, but I never saw him.
That was not my question, Mr. Balch. Did you ever... Excuse me?
It was my impression he was answering your question.
You'd agree with me?
Cross-examination.
Pardon me?
It's not cross-examination. He's supposed to ask open-ended questions. He was answering.
It was my impression that the witness had not completed his answer.
I apologize. I'll try to stop jumping a little too soon, Mr. Balch. Did you ever see the defendant actually physically... Mr. Rosenbaum. Did you ever actually see Mr. Rosenbaum physically injure anyone that night?
No.
Did you personally have any interactions with Mr. Rosenbaum?
I got between him and Colette at one point, and then he threatened me and the defendant.
Now, Binger knows about this already. He knows the defense is going to bring this thing up, so he might as well bring it up himself.
The time you described where you got in between him and Dustin Collette, between Mr. Rosenbaum and Dustin Collette, was the defendant present for that?
It immediately preceded him threatening me and Rittenhouse.
So was the defendant present for that?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Colette had stopped him from starting something on fire. There's a video of it, and Dustin Collette said something to the effect of "fuck around and find out." And I stepped in and told everybody, "Chill out, calm down, stop doing that." I turned and had an exchange with one of the protesters, and I kind of explained to that protester, "Hey, I get what you're trying to do, but like not this." And when I turned around, Rosenbaum was right there in front of my face, yelling and screaming, and I said, "Dude, back up, just like, chill. I don't know what your problem is." And he goes, "If I catch any of you guys alone tonight, I'm going to fucking kill you."
And he said that to you?
Correct.
Did he say that to the defendant as well?
The defendant was there, so yes.
And
By the way, he said, "you guys," plural. Binger was going to try to get it to where Rosenbaum was only threatening Ryan, not Kyle. But no, Ryan Balch is not having anything of that. He said, "Hey, he was there." So yeah.
as far as you could tell, the defendant was close enough to hear what Mr. Rosenbaum said.
That is correct.
Now, when this conversation occurred, were you...
And that's big. Kyle heard it. So here's a guy who threatened to kill Kyle earlier in the evening and then later ambushes him. I wonder if Kyle perceived a threat.
wearing your AR-15 slung in front of your body?
That is correct.
Did Mr. Rosenbaum ever reach for it?
He didn't try.
Did he touch it?
No.
You had your Glock pistol on your hip, correct?
That's correct.
Did he ever reach for that?
No.
Did he ever touch that?
No.
Did he ever touch you?
No.
And at that...
And therefore, why would he try to hurt Kyle? Well, first of all, there's three people there. Dustin, him, and Kyle. Also, this guy's bigger than Kyle, and he's a lot bigger than Rosenbaum. So, of course, he didn't try to reach for the gun. This guy would have killed him.
At that point, could you see that Mr. Rosenbaum had no weapons of any kind?
He had a bag full of what looked to be chemicals to me in his hand. The guy with the Glock with the handgun behind him, and a female with a backpack. That was what I considered Rosenbaum having with him.
Okay. So a couple things. First of all, this bag, this plastic bag.
Yes.
Was it something that you could see inside?
It was a clear hospital type bag. It had containers, but I couldn't really tell what the containers were. I made the assumption at the time and told the FBI the same thing, that I thought it was for making Molotov cocktails.
And was that actually true?
I saw a similar bag later in the night that didn't contain those chemicals. So the assumption did not.
When you say you saw a similar bag in the night, what you mean, and correct me if I'm wrong, is after the defendant shot Mr. Rosenbaum, in that incident, Mr. Rosenbaum threw that same, and we can see from the videos, he throws that same bag at the defendant, and it is left lying on the ground of the 63rd Street car source. You're aware of that from all the videos, correct?
Yes.
Did you go to that 63rd Street car source after the defendant killed Joseph Rosenbaum?
Yes.
Did you see that plastic bag laying on the ground?
Yes.
Did you look inside of it?
Yes.
Did it have any sort of Molotov cocktail?
No, it had some bottles that would be for soap, but I'd seen plenty of people carrying those around during the protest, so I had no idea what was actually contained within them.
And when you say you've seen a lot of people carrying bottles of soap around?
Incognito bottles to carry things around in.
When you looked inside the bag that Joseph Rosenbaum was carrying, did you see any chemicals that could be used to start any sort of tear gas or explosion or fire or anything along those lines?
I didn't really so much as look into it as I kind of picked it up and just kind of tossed it back on the ground.
This is a straw man argument. He's really leaning on this. He's built up this argument that Kyle shot Joseph Rosenbaum because JoJo threw a bag at him, and this plastic bag was harmless. So therefore, Kyle was mean in shooting JoJo. Didn't have to do it. After all, why would you just shoot somebody just because they threw a plastic bag at you? Of course, that's not the argument. McGinnis already testified that JoJo reached for his gun. That's the problem. Forget the bag. Nobody cares about the bag, and hopefully the jury at this point doesn't either. But Binger is going to ride this and ride this. It's a straw man argument. It's a perfect example of one.
But it didn't appear to be any sort of lighter fluid or anything like that in there.
Did you see anything in that bag that you would construe as harmful or dangerous?
No.
In fact, you felt safe enough to walk up to it, pick it up, and look at it. Fair?
That's fair.
So getting back to this incident where the defendant, or that Mr. Rosenbaum is talking to you and the defendant, you mentioned that there's two people, male and female.
By the way, the bag is not in custody. So after he examined the bag, what did he do with it? Did he just put it back? I have no idea.
That are close by. As we sit here today, do you now know who those folks were?
No, I don't.
Did that male and female that you're talking about, did they say anything to you?
No, the male always just had kind of a grin on his face the whole time. Like he was kind of enjoying all the violence and shenanigans that was going on.
Other than that, did he say anything to you?
No.
Did he say anything to the defendant?
I never saw him speak to the defendant.
Did you see the female speak to you at any point?
No.
Did you see her speak to the defendant?
No.
Did either one of them do anything threatening towards you?
No.
Did either one do anything threatening towards the defendant?
No.
And this is another tactic. So he's getting Ryan Balch to say no, 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 based on these other two people being threats. What he's doing is he's trying to convey the idea that nobody threatened Kyle that night.
You've described a series of events that occurred, and I'm trying to go back to the timing here, because I think you mentioned around 9:30 or 10 o'clock is when the police started pushing protesters by. And I think you said there were times when the protesters would come back and then be pushed back and forth. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Would you mind using that pointer, that laser pointer again, and point out the 59th Street car source, please? And just for the benefit of the jury, when you talk about the police moving the protesters out on the street, would you agree with me that the police are pushing people south on Sheridan from 58th to 59th and eventually down south to 60th?
That is correct.
And then you've described times when the police would pull back. Would they pull back north of 59th?
Yes.
So the protesters would be cleared from your area, but then allowed to come back in front of you and back and forth?
Yes.
Okay. When those movements would occur, I know you've described a little bit about the interactions with the folks on the street. In general, how would you say the attitude was of the people on the street towards you and your group?
Most of them seemed indifferent.
When you say most of them, were there others that didn't seem indifferent?
There were some that either seemed really angry about us being there, and then there were other people that seemed like they were kind of happy to just stand around and talk to us.
Do you remember there being issues with the laser pointers?
I do remember them calling out about people on the roof pointing laser pointers at them, and during that exchange with the person, somebody in the crowd actually pulls out a laser pointer and started doing the same thing, and at that point to me it was kind of null, because who's pointing the laser pointer?
Did you have any sort of laser sight on your gun that would illuminate a target?
No.
Do you know who it was up on the roof who was doing
I
anything
had
like that?
no idea who had that up there.
Who cares? Was it Kyle? No. Then who cares? I mean, at some point, the defense has to jump in here and start raising relevance as an objection.
Do you recall speaking with a individual who was taking video for a news source or a media online source called the Rundown Live?
I remember him coming into the car source area, but it wasn't so much as a formal interview as he was just standing around talking to us.
Do you remember him speaking to you and the defendant when that dumpster fire occurred out in front of your location?
Yes.
Do you remember him speaking about staying on your property as opposed to going out in the street?
Yes.
That's something you heard?
Yes.
What did you think about that?
We had protesters coming on the car source. By this point, we were already going out, and people were getting knocked down in the street. We were already going out in the street, dragging them out of the street, making sure they were okay. He seemed to want to keep us out of the street as much as possible, but by that point, there really was no declination between what was car source and what was the street.
Well, you knew where the property line was.
Yes.
But I understand you wanting to maybe go out and help people and things like that, but did you interpret that message, or did you think to yourself, we can stay here and protect this property, but it's not our job to go out there and police the neighborhood. Did that thought ever occur to you?
Not really, no.
Okay, so
Binger was really hoping that Ryan would come back and say, yeah, I didn't really like that. He should have stayed on the property, but Ryan's not going to go for this.
you felt like you were free to go out and confront people that you felt were doing things wrong.
Kyle didn't confront anybody doing that. He went out and pulled the garbage can or the dumpster back to the property line. So he slips this thing in there. That's a dirty trick.
No.
Help me understand that then.
It wasn't so much as I'm going to go out there and confront people because I can. It was if somebody from the crowd asked us to go help them, we would.
Okay, so
Only fast.
if you're invited,
Right.
But you weren't going to just rush into a situation when you're uninvited and try and
That's
interfere.
correct.
The defense has to come back on this whole dumpster thing and make it obvious to the jury that, Kyle went out there into the road to pull a dumpster out of the way like a good citizen would. If you're driving along and you see something out in the middle of the road, you pull over and you drag it out so that somebody won't hit it. In this case here, so they won't prevent the police from being able to move around. People would look upon that as the right thing to do. But again, Binger doesn't believe in the right thing to do. Not when it doesn't serve his purpose. Remember, this is the guy that made hay out of the fact that Kyle dialed 911 because he saw a robbery in progress.
Forgive me if I've already asked this, but I'm trying to keep the timing straight here. We talked about your arrival at the 59th Street car source at around 8 p.m. When you first got there at that time, was there other folks that were supposed to be stationed at the 63rd Street car source?
No.
So when was it that you learned that the group that was supposed to be at 63rd Street had...
This is all gone through 40 minutes ago.
How much longer do you expect this particular examination to last?
Of this witness in total?
Well,
Or about this particular issue?
Well, it's been a lengthy discussion, and I'm just wondering where we're getting.
If I could just finish this question, I'll jump forward. I'm sorry. I may have missed the answer earlier, and I apologize if I've already asked this. Do you remember when it was that you first learned that the folks that were supposed to be at 63rd weren't there anymore?
Yeah, I agree with the judge. This is really dragging. I mean, come on, damn it. None of this stuff is relevant. We want to establish whether Kyle was guilty of the charges. What is all this? I don't know.
What time of the day or evening?
It would have been about an hour after we actually got to the 59th Street.
So I think you said you first got there at 8, so maybe
Yes.
9?
9.
Okay. Now, you've mentioned you had an interaction with Mr. Rosenbaum.
Yes.
Was that at the 59th Street location?
Yes.
After that, did you have any other interactions with him that night?
We encountered him hit and miss throughout the night, but he never approached us again that I saw, and he tried to engage us.
But you saw him around?
Yes.
What were your impressions of him when you saw him on those other times?
No, he was in the middle of them trying to light things on fire, smashing anything he could. In general, he was just being aggressive to the other guys down at the Ultimate. The protesters were getting pretty upset with him being around.
The protesters were upset with him being around. This is not looking good for the prosecution. The jury is hearing this.
They were hit and miss throughout the night, but he never approached us again that I saw, and he tried to engage us.
But you saw him around?
Yes.
What were your impressions of him when you saw him on those other times?
No, he was in the middle of them trying to light things on fire, smashing anything he could. In general, he was just being aggressive to the other guys down at the Ultimate. The protesters were getting pretty upset with him being around.
Gee, it doesn't sound like Joseph Rosenbaum is really a protester, does it? It sounds like he's a rioter. Even the other protesters didn't want him around. If he was there to protest the Jacob Blake shooting, and that was all he was there for, what was the problem?
They were very quick to let us know throughout the night, hey, that guy's not with us, that guy's not with us. Don't be mad at us. And, hey, we get it. We've already dealt with him before. And that was just the general vibe from him throughout the night.
So you mentioned that you saw him starting things on fire. When did you see that?
A couple more dumpsters. They tried to light a road sign on fire that he was a part of that. Just random little things.
Do you know if the defendant saw any of that?
It's possible. The defendant was close by when all this was going on.
When you say Mr. Rosenbaum was trying to start some other dumpsters on fire, where was that at?
Throughout the street, all up and down 59th.
Did he ever take any, or was involved in any of the dumpsters at Ultimate Gas being started on fire, if you know?
I do believe, talking to people after the fact, that he was, but I couldn't confirm that myself.
Okay, and again, I'm not interested in what other people think or even what you've seen on that particular night. And I know it's hard to pretend you haven't seen any other videos in the last year, but I'm trying to focus in on what you actually remember that night, what you saw that night. Do you remember seeing Mr. Rosenbaum actually start any of those dumpsters on fire?
No.
Do you remember actually seeing him start that street sign on fire?
Yes.
Where was that at?
That would have been... The protesters had been pushed a little bit south of us at that point.
Binger was hoping for another no. Instead, Ryan Balch says, yeah, I saw him.
Oh, where's the button? But there were road closed signs all through here, and they drug one off right about where I'm at.
Seems pretty confident in his testimony, doesn't he?
Right in there.
And so you're pointing to a location on Sheridan Road just north of 60th?
That's correct.
And when you say they took a sign, did you see Mr. Rosenbaum do that?
Yes.
And what happened then?
They tried to light it on fire. It wouldn't go, so they kicked it over.
When you say road closed sign, can you describe what that looks like?
It was one of those big metal, the ones that they're portable that they can put in front of a road to stop it, to close it real quick. So about as wide as the witness stand is.
He tried to set a metal sign on fire. That's JoJo.
And again, so they tried to start on fire, but they couldn't.
Yep.
So they just knocked it over.
Yep.
Other than that, did you see Mr. Rosenbaum try and start any other fires?
Not after that, no.
I think you said he was trying to smash things?
Yes.
What did you see?
He was throwing rocks into the car source area. He was throwing rocks at buildings along the street. He was having a pretty good time.
The jury is just, you could almost hear them gnashing their teeth against Joseph Rosenbaum.
Did you ever see him throw any sort of tear gas or gas container or anything along those lines?
I never saw him personally throw anything like that.
When you say he was throwing rocks into the car source location, do you mean the 59th Street car source?
The 59th Street and the gas station that's attached.
You're almost starting to wonder if he's next going to ask him, did you ever see him fire a bazooka? No. What about a tank? Did he ever drive a tank? No. Again, he's trying to get a lot of no's out of Ryan Balch to sort of offset this whole negative mystique that's been surrounding Joseph Rosenbaum.
Did you see those rocks hit anyone?
No, I didn't see anyone.
What action, if any, did you take after seeing the defendant throw rocks at your group? I'm sorry, Mr. Rosenbaum.
We didn't really take any action. By that point, the protesters were also pretty done with people doing that, so they were policing them as well.
Did you feel like Mr. Rosenbaum's act of throwing rocks at your group was a danger to your safety?
Yes.
Did you feel like you needed to defend yourself?
At that time, no.
Why not?
His aim wasn't very good, and he was pretty far away.
Sounds like he was trying, but not really succeeding.
Yeah.
Whoops. He was trying, but he was not successful. So how can you claim then that Joseph Rosenbaum was not the aggressor and didn't put Kyle in a dangerous situation? He tried to put these guys into a dangerous situation before. By the way, I should also mention, what stopped him, Ryan Balch said the distance was too far. But you know what? Later in the evening, Joseph Rosenbaum got very close to Kyle Rittenhouse.
Other than what we just talked about, did you have any other sightings, conversations, encounters, or anything along those lines with Mr. Rosenbaum that night?
No.
Now, you said there was a time in which where the police had pushed the protesters down south of 60th Street. Is that right?
That is correct.
And I know you said that there was some back and forth. Did there come a time in which the line of police vehicles kind of finalized and stayed at 60th?
Yes.
When that happened, were you still at the 59th Street location?
That is correct.
After the police had pushed all the protesters south of 60th, was there any further risk of danger to the 59th Street car source location?
We were unaware of if or when the police were going to pull back again. So we did leave people there.
If the police hadn't pulled back, if they'd stayed at that 60th Street line and kept the protesters south of 60th, would there have been any further risk of danger to the 59th?
Calls for conjecture.
59th Street location?
Sustained.
Yeah.
After the police pushed the protesters south of 60th, was there any damage done at all after that to the 59th Street location?
Not that I'm aware of.
Were there any protesters around even trying to cause any damage to that location?
No, most of the protesters that were still at the 59th with us were just standing around talking.
After the police, I understand you may not have known at the time, but it turned out that they established that line at 60th and pretty much kept it there. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Did you ever, once that happened, did you ever walk through that line heading south on Sheridan?
Yes.
Who was with you when you did that?
Jason Mikowski, Kyle Rittenhouse, and Dustin Collette was supposed to be with us.
When you say it was supposed to be, what happened?
Once we got across the line, I turned around and didn't see him.
Where did you go?
From there, I got mixed up in the crowd. I ran across the Ultimate, went inside there, and came back and started looking for the defendant.
Was this the time where the Daily Caller reporter Richie McGinnis was following you?
Told you in my previous video, I said they got separated when Ryan Balch went across the street to the gas station.
We had passed Mr. McGinnis before we crossed the police line south of 60th.
So you're aware of this video of Richie McGinnis interviewing the defendant, and then you and the defendant walking south on Sheridan through the police line with Mr. McGinnis with you. Is that
Correct.
right? Is that?
Yeah, he's aware of it. Of course he's aware of it. He's being interviewed in it.
The time you're talking about?
Yes.
And you said there was someone else, Mr. Okowski, with you?
Yes.
Is he? Do you know? Is he pictured in that video?
You see him following in behind us, I do believe.
Okay. Now, we watched that video earlier today. There is a time in which you encounter some folks with some fire extinguishers. Do you remember that?
No, I don't remember that.
Once you passed 60th, and just so we're clear, you were walking on the west side of Sheridan Road,
Correct.
south of 60th. Richie McGinnis is there recording, correct?
Yes.
Tell us what you did after that point.
Once we got through 60th, we kind of paused on the north side of 60th. They were throwing rocks at the cops. And once they saw us there, they stopped throwing. They kind of shifted where they were throwing the rocks. Had the cops immediately right next to us, a little further down. We walked across, and once we entered the crowd, the defendant started asking people if they needed any first aid. I was doing the same. And walking through past there at an indeterminate time, I lost track of the defendant.
Had you discussed with the defendant what your plan was once you crossed that police line?
We were going to check and see if anybody needed any first aid, then go down to 63rd and make sure nobody was destroying it. And I'm not sure if the defendant was there when I said it, but me and Lakowski had agreed that if we got separated, we would go back to 59th.
Did you have any specific instructions for the defendant when you were heading out in that location?
Yeah, it was just stay close, don't get separated, and see if anybody's hurt.
You also told him to keep his mouth shut and not engage with people, correct?
I told several individuals at 59th Street that.
Including the defendant.
I believe I told him not to respond the way he was to certain people.
What do you mean the way he was?
Oh, Binger's thinking, oh, juicy. All right, we got him now. Call the warden.
That goes back to earlier in the night when he said, "I love you too, ma'am." That's when I told him, "Hey, don't say that."
I love you too, ma'am. Binger's going to go, okay, I think I can use this. What I'll do is I'll convince the jury that because Kyle said, "I love you too, ma'am," that's provocation. He was asking for somebody to attack him by saying that. It's a little bit of sarcasm, but under no circumstances does that invite somebody to attack you.
Don't even respond.
Why not?
Just because it can cause somebody to escalate the situation if they feel like you're making fun of them a little bit. So it just wasn't needed.
So the plan once you cross 60th is stay together, but if you get separated, go back.
Correct.
And try not to engage.
Correct.
And you said there came a time in which you lost track of the defendant.
This is correct.
How did that happen?
Got lost in the crowd. I had a female protester approach me and started to try to get into a pro-gun, anti-gun exchange. From there, I went inside to see if we'd went to the Ultimate to get any snacks. When I came back out, I encountered more individuals protecting the property. I talked to them. I assumed at the time he wasn't over there anymore, and I started to make my way back north to 59.
Can we please play exhibit number 17? I'm going to need to turn on the TVs again.
So you guys are kind of like medics who are packing,
Yeah,
right?
basically. Well, he's an EMT, and
Gotcha.
I'm just kind of protecting his ass.
Oh, so you're a certified EMT? Yeah. Gotcha. And do you work as an EMT normally?
I'm a lifeguard normally. I got my ALS and
Gotcha.
And I'm former Army infantry, and I got a whole bunch of trial training.
Well, thank you for your service.
We got you.
I appreciate your service.
Oh, yeah.
Notice that Kyle and Ryan wave at the police. The police are going to see these guys as non-threats. Why didn't the police arrest them? The police didn't arrest them because they weren't attacking them. Now, this is Kyle being the big man, walking around like he's big stuff. He's 17 years old, and he's got Ryan Balch, an Army veteran, next to him. Yeah, he's going to puff his chest out a little. So what?
We're running through out over there. Anybody need medical? Medical? Fire sensors are here to put out the fires. They know. We're good. Okay, good. They know. He just got shot up. You good? It's all right. I'm not shot.
Do these people look like they're scared of Kyle?
No, you got run a bullet. Oh, no, I just got run.
Pause the video right there. Did you see yourself in that video?
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it appears that you are a little bit ahead of Mr. Rittenhouse in this video, but then you start walking east across Sheridan Road.
Correct.
Okay. And in that direction is the Ultimate gas station.
Yes.
Do you remember where you went after that?
That's the point at which I went inside the gas station
Okay.
and then came back out.
I thought I heard you say that the purpose of going across the police lines was to see if people are hurt and to go check on the 63rd Street location.
That is correct.
Help me understand, how does going to the Ultimate gas station and going inside fit in with that?
Because there were other people at the Ultimate gas station.
I don't understand what that
To go
means.
over there to see if they're hurt too.
Oh, I see. So you went over there to see if those people needed help?
Yes.
Did you go inside the Ultimate gas station?
Yes.
And I think you said at one point you were going to get a snack for
Yeah.
yourself. Did you know at that point that you were leaving the defendant?
No.
What did you expect he was going to do at that point?
I thought he was following me.
How long was it before you realized he hadn't followed you?
By the time I got across the street,
What did you do then?
I continued on to the Ultimate gas station and talked to some of the guys there. Turned around, he wasn't around. Went back inside and went inside.
Inside the gas station?
Yes.
This is the old Kyle ditched Ryan Balch so he could go out and shoot people.
Why didn't you go looking for the defendant?
I assumed that he had went inside the gas station as well.
And then when you looked inside, did you see him?
No.
So where did you look for him then?
Back outside the gas station?
In the gas station lot?
Yes.
And this is a time in the evening when there are a lot of people in that lot.
This is correct.
Did you find him?
No.
So if he's not inside the gas station and he's not in the lot, did you go out around the area looking for him?
I walked on the outside of the crowd and tried to look for him, and then I decided to head north to 59th.
Why is that?
That's where I told Lukowski we should go.
Do you know where Jason Lukowski was at this point in the video that we just paused at?
He was behind Richard McGinnis in this.
And when you walk across Sheridan to the east, do you know where Mr. Lukowski went?
No idea.
When is the next time you saw Mr. Lukowski?
After the shootings happened?
So when you went back, when you left Ultimate Gas and headed back to 59th Street, did you see Mr. Lukowski at that point?
No.
Did he return to 59th Street while you were back there?
I never made it back to 59th Street.
Why is that?
The shooting started.
Okay, and we'll get to that in a moment.
Yep.
So your testimony is that as we're watching this video now, which has been taken by Richie McGinnis, and we see the defendant right there, that Jason Lukowski is somewhere close by.
He should be.
Okay. Can we continue to play the video, please? Let us know if you see Mr. Lukowski, okay?
Oh, it didn't even leave a well. It just stunned. It just fucking stunned.
Little pepper boy never hurt nobody.
I'm having a hard time understanding how this paints a picture of Kyle being guilty of reckless homicide or intentional homicide.
It was literally just like,
It's a little spicy, that's all.
it was like, oh shit, that was really annoying.
Yeah, I'll sell some.
Could you please not?
It looks like he's looking for Ryan. Maybe.
Does anybody need medical? Does anybody need medical?
I think someone's got some medical weed, I'll tell you that.
Does anybody need medical? Medical! Everybody need medical? You were just the ones about get out the car. Trying to hook up. Now you talking medical? I remember you said get out the car. Fuck, you talking about medical? Yeah. Y'all guys are good. Does anybody need medical? Medical!
Well, yesterday or today?
Today.
Good question here is, if Kyle's looking for provocation, why doesn't he escalate the tension between him and those three black dudes? Why doesn't he walk into this crowd if he's looking for the confrontation? Why does he seem to be avoiding confrontation?
You just had up and down talking about get off the car. Now you talking about medical.
What car over in the dealership?
I'm going to stop it there because there's nothing to see in the rest of this video. Did you see Jason Lukowski at any point in this video?
No, but the camera never panned to the rear either.
Sure, I understand. I'm just asking if you saw him. Okay, fair enough. So you
Wow, big revelation there.
indicated that you went over to the Ultimate Gas and then eventually back to 59th.
I headed towards 59th.
When is the next time, after what we've just saw here, when is the next time you saw the defendant that night?
I didn't see him again that night.
By the way, the whole thing about, did you see Jason in this video? It sounds like he was just wanting another excuse to play that video. Because what does that settle? Whether he had seen Jason or not in the video would say what about Kyle's guilt?
At all?
Outside of a picture, no.
All right. I would like to play exhibit number 18 at that timestamp I indicated, please.
It's relevant to something.
Things are a lot more peaceful now.
The cops decided to gas the fucking area.
Yeah.
Here I am walking the EMT around, protecting his ass. How the EMT's working.
Seconds. We missed a little bit at the beginning of this. A little bit further? Yeah, let's play that, please.
And we'll see how this goes since everyone seems to be peaceful now with the militia. Seems like things are a lot more peaceful now.
The cops decided to gas the fucking area.
Yeah.
Here I am walking the EMT around, protecting his ass. How the EMT's working.
Pause that for a second. You saw yourself in that video. You mentioned that the police decided to gas something or other. I didn't quite catch it all. What were you talking about there?
I was talking about when they gassed the 59th Street location.
When you say they, you mean the police?
Yes.
When did that happen?
In the video where they show them throwing me and the defendant a bottle of water, it's like immediately preceding that.
So why do you know what was going on that caused the police to?
They saw that we had protesters standing in and amongst us, and it seemed like they didn't care for that too much.
Okay. Were you affected by that gas?
Yes.
How so?
Well, I'd already been hit with some sort of gas bomb from the protest crowd, and then that's when the gas hit the area. So I had to go inside and sit down for a couple minutes.
And when you say gas, is this like a tear gas type thing?
Tear gas, yeah.
Okay. What physical effect did that have on you?
I couldn't breathe for a good minute and a half there, solidly. Once I got in, sat down, the defendant helped me out with that. I was okay.
The defendant helped you with that.
For the days after, I really couldn't talk too well.
What did the defendant do to help you?
Kept shoveling water at me. So.
Did he give you any sort of medicine or anything
No.
like that? Okay. So when you're talking about the police gassing
Medicine? Okay.
things, that's what you're referring to?
Yes.
And then you talk about something about the EMT having to guard the EMT or something like that?
Yes.
What did you mean by that?
I was referring to me watching the defendant.
So you're basically saying that one of your roles was to
Yeah,
guard
that
and protect
was
the
part of my
defendant.
intent for going south.
And this conversation occurs at the Ultimate gas station?
Yes.
Where is this time-wise in relation to what we had just seen in the last video where you were being followed by Richie McGinnis and then we saw you walk east across Ultimate Gas? Where is this in relation to that?
I don't remember exactly when I had this conversation, but I would say it was probably pretty soon after that.
So this is after you walk across the street, you said you went into the store, grabbed some snacks or whatever, and then I think you actually said earlier you spoke to some of the folks that were... I'm trying to set the time frame for the jury, but the ultimate relevance, Your Honor, is that this witness is indicating that his role was to protect the defendant that night, and he's obviously not with the defendant at this
What
moment.
would be the relevance of that anyway?
Well, I think it goes to the overall issue of the safety of the defendant and the safety of this crowd, the perceived need, the perceived danger, the perceived need for protection south of 60th
Perceived
Street.
by whom?
By at least this individual who's close to the
What
defendant.
relevance would his perception?
Because they're part of the same group, and he's taken this responsibility, and now they're in an area where there's a perceived need to protect the defendant.
Well, why don't we take a break? Please don't talk about the case during the break. Read, watch, or listen to any account of the trial. Let's see about 5 after.
I can't believe that the defense allowed him to play that whole "Where is Jason" video over and didn't say anything about relevance. We're going to play a video now to find out, can you spot Jason? Like, what the hell? The defense has been sleeping a lot during this trial. They finally raised the relevance issue, and Binger's response is really murky.
Were they, anybody who didn't like him? How about the staff down here ate all the chips before I got any, but we have Subway tomorrow.
You know, and this is where I disagree heartily with the defense when it comes to this whole relevance thing. I'd be pounding the relevance issue all the time and saying every time, I don't understand how this has anything to do with the guilt of the accused, so that it plants in the jury's minds, yeah, well, maybe there isn't anything here. They're letting Binger lead them to believe that this is somehow important. I don't get it. I don't understand what the defense is doing here.
Okay, good. Let's go.
Admitted evidence. This is Exhibit 11. This is the Corey Elijah or Corey Washington live stream. We've got a pause here at, I believe that's the 54-minute and 30-second mark. Or to be precise, 54:29. Do you see yourself in this video?
I do.
Okay. We're going to play this video forward for about 20 seconds, and then we'll pause.
Okay.
That's a fireworks man way down there.
Riveting action.
I don't know what that is. You young kid.
Now, Mr. Balch, what we've just seen in that video, it showed you walking near the the gas price electronic sign there for the Ultimate gas station. Would you agree with me on that?
I would.
And you appear at the end here to kind of walk behind that, almost at the corner of 60th and Sheridan. Is that fair to say?
That's fair to say.
Did you just see the defendant run through the screen?
I saw him, yes.
Now, you had testified earlier that when you were at the Ultimate gas station, you were looking for him. It appears that you were within 10, 15 feet of it. Did you see him at that time?
No.
If you had seen him, what would you have done?
I would have went with him.
Is it after this point, then, that you returned to the 59th Street car source?
I headed in that direction, yes.
And you said you didn't make it there because why?
Shooting started.
What shooting was that?
I got to, I had to point at the thing.
Sure.
I headed across 60th. The Bearcats were right here. When I got there, a sheriff's deputy held me over to the car. I'm at the Bearcat. He opened the door. I sat there and had a 2 to 3 minute conversation with him, maybe about what was going on over there. At that point, he directed me to go behind the Bearcats to go across the street. So, at about that point, I moved west across Sheridan Road. When I got there, I turned to go north, and that's when I heard a pistol shot. And then almost immediately following it, I heard 4 rifle shots.
What did you do then?
I turned and headed south.
Where did you go?
Towards where I'd heard the shooting. So, I was right around in here, and I ran across the street into this green area here, telling everybody to get down. And then I got to the end, overlooking this area here. There's like a low wall. And then shooting erupted behind me over in this general area.
Kyle has long left the scene. He didn't see the shooting. I'm not sure what of value any of this is.
We can see in this video that the defendant, Kyle Rittenhouse, is walking up the street after he has just shot and killed Anthony Huber and just shot Paige Grosskreutz in the arm. At the time, and I know with the benefit of hindsight you've watched these things, but at that particular moment, had you any idea what had just happened?
No.
Did you see those shootings?
No.
Did you see the defendant?
No.
So what's the point of this?
You've been trained in the military, been around shootings before, fair to say?
Yes.
How is it possible that you didn't see those things?
I wasn't looking down the street when it happened.
That's a good answer.
Did you hear those gunshots?
Yes.
Did they draw your attention to that area?
Yes.
Did you look?
Yes.
So how come you say you didn't see?
Because by the time I got that far, close enough to see it, everything was done.
Did you see the bodies? The body of Mr. Huber?
Yes.
At what point, when you're moving down the street, did you see that body?
After I got to Grosskreutz, when I got down there, Jason Lekowski was helping put a tourniquet on his arm. There's actually a video of that where I come around the side and ask everybody's all right if they got it. Saw the wound on Grosskreitz's arm. Holy crap. And then I ran over to check Anthony Huber's body.
When we played this video before, we've heard a lot of people's voices shouting out about the defendant. That's the guy, whatever, things like that. Did you hear any of those voices at that time?
I wasn't really trying to pay attention to what they were pointing out.
When in this process did you realize that an individual or individuals, people, had been shot?
Well, I'd heard the shooting, so I knew that there was shooting going on. I didn't know anybody had actually been hit until I got to Grosskreutz.
Is it fair to say that this wasn't the first time all evening that you'd heard gunshots?
We'd heard them a couple of times throughout the night.
When you would hear gunshots, would you wonder if that meant someone was injured?
Most of the time they were far enough in the distance that there would be very little impact from us going in that direction.
I think you testified earlier that what originally started you heading south was hearing the pistol shot and the 4 shots that occurred at Car Source in 63rd.
Correct.
And that, according to the map, is about 3 blocks away.
Correct.
You talk about hearing other gunshots that are in the distance. Why did the shots here 3 blocks away attract your attention when others did not?
They were a lot closer than the other ones had been, and there was the potential that people that I was with that night were down there.
I have no idea of the relevance of this. I mean, who cares?
Did you think to yourself, that's the defendant?
No.
You didn't know? Did you know where he was at?
I didn't know where he was at, but I didn't assume who had been doing the shooting.
When we see you in this video, is that after you have looked for the defendant?
Yes.
When we see you in this video, did you have any idea where the defendant was?
No.
When we see you in this video, had you checked at Ultimate Gas to see if the defendant was there?
Yes.
Did you find him?
No.
When we see you in this video, had you already traveled north of the police line at 60th?
Yes.
Had you seen the defendant up there?
No.
Okay, he didn't know where the defendant was. We've established that.
It's fair to say that at this moment in the video, you didn't have any idea where the defendant was.
I had no idea where him or Jason Lekowski were.
And even though he's walking up the middle of the street near where you're at this point in the video, you didn't see him.
I didn't pay any attention to him, no.
This had better be good. It had better show Kyle Rittenhouse doing something. Of course it doesn't. Because he's already trying to turn himself in. Probably in the car going home.
Sam's mixed up there. We're going to play a little bit of that video here. I'd like you to take a look at it if you could, please. Thanks.
All right, guys. So here's what we got going on. We are not trying to spook anyone. We're going to move in. It looks like...
Okay, just play the video, please. Thanks. Mr. Balch, there's an object on the ground on the left side of this view screen. Do you see that object?
Yes.
Can you
Oh, no, not the bag. Come on. We've already heard about the bag.
identify that for us?
That's the plastic bag that I picked up to take a look at.
That's the one that Mr. Rosenbaum threw. Is that correct?
Correct.
A couple more things finally. After all is said and done here, you stayed at this location and spoke to some individuals who were from the media. Is that fair to say?
Wait, we spent all that time to show us that bag? Really?
We kind of got ambushed by them.
Well, make it sound like they were trying to attack you. They came up and were...
Yeah, they came up out of nowhere and we weren't expecting them.
When you say we, who was with you?
Jason Lekowski was with me.
When these folks asked you your name, what did you tell them?
I gave them a false name of Thomas Craig
Why did you do that?
to protect my identity so that I could get out of there and figure out what was going on.
There were folks there that showed you video of what happened that night.
Yes.
In those view screens, were you able to see the defendant?
One of the live streamers did show me a picture of the defendant when he was laying on the ground, being struck on the head, I believe, when he fired his weapon.
From that, were you able to identify that that was someone that you had been with
Yes.
that evening? Did you admit that?
To them, no.
Okay, we know it was Kyle on the ground. What are we trying to do here?
In fact, when they confronted you on it and accused you of knowing exactly who that was, you lied to them and told them you did not, correct?
Correct.
And when I discussed this with you, you gave me the explanation that because you were concerned for your safety at that time?
Yeah, we were surrounded by several people, and there were groups of them milling around us as well.
At that moment that you lied about knowing the defendant, you still had your AR-15, correct?
Correct.
And your Glock.
No, I didn't have the Glock at this time.
And Mr. Lekowski was with you?
Yes.
Was he armed?
Yes.
Were there police cars nearby?
Further down the street from us, yes, but they were dealing with the shootings and whatnot.
Once you were informed that the defendant was the one who had been involved in these shootings, was a suspect, did you approach the police that night and tell them about your information?
No.
I have nothing further.
Thank you. Mr.
We spent 30 minutes just to establish that he lied to the press about his name and whether he knew Kyle. And during the witness interviews that took place before this, Thomas Binger should have known that the guy had a perfectly good explanation for this. Oh, jeez. So, in all of these 2 hours or whatever of testimony from Ryan Balch, what did the prosecution gain? Nothing. There were only 2 witnesses that were, I would say, strong witnesses to what happened that night. Ryan Balch, Richie McGinnis. Both of them took the stand, and neither one of them gave Binger anything. Like my video, subscribe to my channel.